You remember the way she tilted her head not to understand, but to make you explain yourself again. Not because she didn't hear you, but because clarity bored her. It was never your logic she wanted. It was the heat rising in your throat when your reason began to break. You keep returning to that moment, not a memory, but a flavor, bitter, metallic, like the silence after a violin string snaps. She smiled, didn't she? Not at your argument, but at the ache of needing to be understood. And yet, you believed she would love you more the clearer you became. You sharpened your thoughts like glass, forgetting that she never wanted a mirror. She wanted fog, something to disappear into. There is a kind of madness that wears perfume and listens with tilted eyes. A madness that does not seek truth, only theater. And you, still dreaming that logic might seduce chaos, never saw the stage lights burning through your spine. You believed that understanding was the bridge, that if you could just find the right sequence of words, polished, orderly, irrefutable, she would finally meet you halfway. You didn't know then that logic is not her language, that she smells your reason like a withered flower, turns it in her fingers, then drops it wordlessly to the floor. Not with contempt, with indifference. For her, the scent fades too quickly. She craves what lingers, what confuses, what intoxicates. And so you spoke clearly. You offered coherence, and she drifted farther. You assumed attraction was a matter of explanation, that if you exposed enough truth, she would be compelled by its elegance. But the more precise your thoughts, the more distant her gaze. You mistook her nods for listening, her questions for interest. They were rituals, not engagement. Each one a small performance of curiosity, while her instinct searched for something else, tension, not certainty. You forgot what every child knows: what gleams too clearly becomes invisible. She didn't want your answer, she wanted your unrest. It is not cruelty, it is nature. And nature does not negotiate. You can no more reason your way into her desire than argue with the ocean to stay still. Her fascination blooms not in the clean light of logic, but in the dim corridors of contradiction. You are clear, she disappears. You are uncertain, she watches. You fracture, she comes closer. This is not malice, it is magnetism. You were taught to stand firm. She was drawn to the moment you trembled. Still you persisted. Still you explained, clarified, refined. Each statement became a monument to your inner structure, your discipline, your intellect. But she was not admiring architecture. She was sniffing for blood. And you, believing yourself solid, bled without noticing. Every time she misunderstood, every time she twisted your meaning, you rushed to repair the bridge. But it was never broken. She was never trying to cross it. She was watching to see how you'd scramble. You call it irrational, and you're right. But irrationality is not weakness, not for her. It is strategy woven into instinct. Where you think forward, she spirals. Where you move linearly, she dances in circles. Not to reach a destination, but to generate sensation. You wanted clarity, she wanted perfume, something invisible, invasive, lingering in the air long after the speaker has gone. Your thoughts dissolve in her world, not because they are wrong, but because they lack scent. You may say, but I am honest, I speak plainly, I do not manipulate, and so you disqualify yourself, because honesty, to her, is often the dullest note. Predictability is impotence. A man who shows his cards too quickly is not trustworthy. He is dead. She doesn't want to kill you, but she needs to feel your pulse, not through your resume of thoughts, but in how you shake when she vanishes, in how your voice wavers when she smiles without reason, in how you suffer when she no longer needs your clarity. This is the torment of the logical man. He sees the chessboard. He plans 12 moves ahead, but she is not playing chess. She is fire, she is fog, she is thunder without pattern. You speak as if the world were a puzzle. She lives as if the world were a mood. And so you become incompatible not because you lack depth, but because your depth has sharp edges. She wants to drown, not be dissected. Your mind says if I can prove my case, she will understand me. But you mistake understanding for connection. She may comprehend your ideas, even admire them, and yet feel nothing. You crafted a cathedral of logic, expecting her to pray inside. She walks past it barefoot, humming a song that contradicts itself. She is not mocking you, she simply does not worship the same gods. And so, your frustration becomes contempt. You call her illogical, you accuse her of evasion, you demand consistency, but she was never pretending to be consistent. That was your projection. You needed her to make sense so you could trust her, but she doesn't live by sense. She lives by signal, by smell, by atmosphere, and your need for linearity makes you smell of sterility clean, cold, unprovocative, safe in the worst way. You assumed your mind was your value, and in some realms, it is. The world of men, of systems, of tools here, logic is king. But in her world, the pulse rules. Energy, ambiguity, sensation, these are her currencies. The clearer you speak, the less she listens. The more you explain, the more invisible you become. You thought intelligence would seduce her, but it only made her yawn. And yet you keep returning, not to her, to the memory of her, to the irrational scent, to the way she laughed in the middle of your sentence, to the chaos that cracked your order. You hated her for it, and you miss her for it, because for a brief moment, your fortress collapsed, and in that collapse, you felt something more vivid than certainty. You felt danger, and the dead part of you stirred. It is humiliating, isn't it, to be outmaneuvered not by a stronger argument, but by a glance, to be undone not by logic, but by silence, to lose not a debate, but control. You pride yourself on seeing clearly, but she never needed to blind you. She only needed to confuse you long enough for you to reveal your hunger. That is the perfume, the irrational allure. It is not her words that haunt you. It is how she made you betray your own principles, how she turned you into a beggar for meaning, and how she disappeared just as you thought you were about to win. But there is no victory here, only the echo of your own logic, swallowed by a smile that never explained itself. You thought she wanted the truth. You offered it to her raw, sharpened, without ornament. You believed a woman longs for a man unafraid to face the abyss. You believed she would stand beside the one who sees the world without illusion. And for a moment, you believed she did. She watched you speak. She let you think she was listening. But you failed to notice she wasn't gazing into your eyes, she was studying the cracks behind them. You assumed the truth would bind her to you, but she only leaned closer to watch it tremble, like a child flicking the edge of a wineglass to hear how long it rings. You were not her equal, you were her experiment, and your vulnerability, your sacred transparency was not met with reverence, but curiosity. You showed her the mirror of your soul, and she tilted her head, not to understand, but to ask, what happens if I drop this? She never said it, but you knew, somewhere beneath your explanations, your arguments, your intellectual scaffolding, you felt it. That tightness in your chest, the way your words began to curl back on themselves. The invisible edge she stood behind, the distance she preserved while you bled symbols to feel seen. And still you mistook that distance for depth. You told yourself she was processing, that she was touched. But in truth, she was measuring not the content of your truth, but the weight of your reaction to her silence. You have never been more exposed than when you tried to be sincere with a woman who already made up her mind. And you knew it too late. You gave her the mirror thinking she would look into it and recognize the soul behind your logic, but she only turned it toward you. She watched you squirm beneath your own reflection, watched you try to make it mean something, and when the meaning failed to hold her, she let it fall. That's the part you don't say out loud. She didn't leave because she didn't understand you. She left because she understood you too well and found no mystery left to chase. You gave her coherence. She smelled closure, and closure is the death of tension. You told her who you are, and in doing so, made it final. But she lives for what moves, what hides, what resists being named. To her, your self-knowledge was a coffin. She does not test you by asking questions. She tests you by how you respond when she stops asking, when she begins to contradict for no reason, when she pulls away mid-sentence, when she answers your clarity with fog. In that moment, she's not seeking truth. She's pressing your shell, listening for a crack. And the more you scramble to restore the connection, the more you confirm that it was never real. Your mistake wasn't in being vulnerable. It was in believing vulnerability guaranteed loyalty. But she is not moved by the logic of consequence. She is moved by the scent of instability, not the chaos that destroys everything, but the subtle tremor that reveals you can still be unmade. You thought your composure was strength, but she has no use for statues. She studies how things fall, and so you built the perfect mirror, polished, articulate, profound. You waited for her admiration. Instead, she pressed her finger to its surface, then asked, "Is that all?" You mistook honesty for intimacy, but to her, it was a game already solved. And what is more repulsive to the instinct than a game already solved? You blame her. You call her cruel, manipulative, shallow. But those are just words you use to escape a deeper horror that perhaps your truth wasn't captivating. That perhaps, beneath your certainty, there was nothing left to discover. And that she left not because she failed to see your depth, but because she did, and found the bottom. She shatters your mirror not out of malice, but necessity to feel alive. She needs uncertainty, mystery, ambiguity, and you, in your desperation to be known, revealed too much, too soon. You told her what to expect, and now you blame her for being bored. You say she's unpredictable, but it was never about her logic, it was about your exposure. You forgot the oldest rule of seduction: what can be named too easily cannot be desired. She wanted the echo, not the speech, the crackle, not the flame. You gave her your essence like a confession, and she recoiled not because you were wrong, but because you were finished. Finality is fatal to her attraction, and so she breaks the mirror, not because she hates what she sees, but because it no longer moves. And the tragedy, you thought breaking the mirror meant she never looked. But in truth, she looked too deeply and found you already carved in stone. You think you lost her because she couldn't follow your logic. The truth is more bitter she followed it to its end and chose silence. You think if you explain yourself one more time, maybe she'll come back. But she doesn't miss your ideas. She misses the moment before she understood them. That flicker of possibility, that scent of something hidden. You gave her the answer and killed the question. She was not interested in what you knew. She was interested in what you might conceal. And you, naive in your clarity, showed her everything. You left no room for myth, no room for projection, no shadow for her fantasies to dance in, and now you wonder why she dreams elsewhere. You think the pain comes from her betrayal, but it's deeper than that. The pain comes from seeing yourself through the eyes of someone who found your depths too navigable, someone who made your truth feel small, and that is the wound you can't reason away. Now you stare into the shattered pieces. You still want to believe it was her fault, that she was too fickle, too emotional, too irrational. But in the silence that follows, something colder creeps in, the realization that she was right to walk away, not because you were false, but because you were finished. And what terrifies you most is not that she didn't stay, but that no woman stays when the mystery dies. You told yourself you weren't performing, that every word was deliberate, every movement sincere. But now, watching the aftermath, you see it how every conversation was a stage, how every act of clarity was bait, how even your authenticity was choreography. You thought logic made you free, but in her presence, you became a puppet of your own intellect, twitching each time she withheld applause. You weren't speaking to be understood. You were speaking to be desired, and when the desire didn't come, you performed harder. This is the humiliation you never admit, that even your reason bowed to her chaos. That despite your declarations of detachment, your logic was a mask trembling on a face desperate for recognition. She did not force you to play the fool, she only watched. And in her watching, you danced, you adjusted, explained, rephrased, hoping your coherence would earn contact. But contact never came, only the silence. The silence between scenes, the silence between puppets, because she, too, was performing. Not with words, with moods, glances, absences. You thought you were navigating a conversation, but you were inside a theater she built without bricks, only instincts. You mistook her contradictions for confusion, but they were rehearsed. She wasn't trying to understand you, she was measuring the temperature of your hunger. And hunger, once spotted, is never respected. She smelled yours long before you named it. You thought she wanted answers, she wanted reactions. Not clarity chemistry, not stability vibration. And when you tried to ground the moment, to give it shape and name, you broke the spell. You collapsed the theater. You reminded her that she was real, and for that, she disappeared, not out of cruelty, but boredom. In her silence, you collapsed inward. You believed logic would protect you, that your detachment made you immune. But now you sit alone, rehearsing arguments for a stage that's been torn down, trying to win a debate with a shadow, trying to outthink a presence that never spoke in thoughts. You argue in an empty theater, waiting for a curtain that will not rise again. And this is your tragedy, that you only became real after the play ended. Only in the silence did you begin to hear the emptiness behind your performance. You thought you were rational, but you were just efficient at hiding longing inside polished sentences. You thought you were sovereign, but your self-worth was still pegged to how she looked at you. You called it dignity, but now you know it was just denial. There was a moment, one you keep reliving, when she asked you a question, not to understand, but to stir the air. You answered with precision, and she looked past you. That was the moment the strings began to fray. You didn't notice it then, but she did. You were too busy perfecting your point. She was already exiting the stage. Why do you remember that moment so vividly? Not because it mattered, but because something in you broke when she didn't respond. That break is the only honest thing that happened. And now, you circle it endlessly. You revisit every phrase you said, every gesture you made, like a priest reciting a dead liturgy, hoping the gods will return. But she is not returning. And even if she did, she wouldn't recognize you, because the man she saw was not you, it was your armor. And armor, once cracked, can never be mysterious again. You showed her the machinery behind your calm, the sweat behind your poise, the loneliness behind your knowledge. And she smiled not cruelly, but with distance, the kind of smile one offers to a ghost. This is the cruelty of insight. Once you see the strings, you can't go back to innocence. You can't unlearn the dance you were performing. You can't pretend you were untouched. Your logic was a stage, your love, a monologue. And she was never part of the play. She was the silence between your lines, the mirror you tried not to look into. You ask yourself now what was real. Was it the words, the moments of laughter, the flickers of closeness? But this question is a trap. You don't want the truth. You want the feeling back, the sense that you mattered, that your clarity could move someone. But you see it now, clarity is sterile. Precision is unsexy. Truth, when presented too nakedly, is repulsive, not because it is wrong, but because it leaves no room for dreaming. And she wanted to dream, not of your perfection, but of your potential, of your edge, of your mystery. You gave her a finished portrait. She wanted a shadow moving behind a veil. Now, in the aftermath, you feel nothing, not anger, not sadness, just a kind of cold recognition. You see how much effort you spent arranging yourself to be understood, to be admired, and how little it moved her. You weren't too much. You were too knowable. She left, not because she didn't love you, but because there was no chase left, no surprise, no space for her fantasy. You gave her structure, she craved sensation. You gave her logic, she desired myth. And you, so sure of your mind, never asked what she truly saw when she looked at you. Perhaps she saw a teacher, perhaps a monument, perhaps a museum, but never a flame. You burn now, but alone. Not because she stole something, but because you gave everything too early. You tried to win her with completion. She wanted a beginning that never ends. So now you sit with silence, the silence between the puppets. No applause, no curtain call, just the faint smell of her perfume in your memory, and the unbearable truth that reason cannot seduce wonder. You were not rejected because you lacked value. You were rejected because you left nothing hidden. And in the theater of desire, it is not the brightest light that draws the eye, it is the one flickering just beyond reach. Somewhere, she is laughing at nothing, or weeping for no reason, or walking barefoot in a dream you will never enter. You still remember the way her fingers hovered over the mirror before she let it drop, but you never knew if it was carelessness or mercy. Now, you speak only to yourself, but even that voice feels rehearsed. You long not her, but for the version of you that believed he could be chosen for his mind. And in the stillness that follows, no lesson arrives, no justice, no meaning, only the faintest echo of a string plucked once, never again, of a stage abandoned before the final act, of logic weeping quietly behind the curtain